It was the scream that split my world in half. Not the kind you hear in movies, not some overacted shriek. It was real. Raw. It clawed through the air like a wounded animal, snapping my attention to the school gate. I dropped my keys before I even realized I was running. And then I saw him. My son, Noah, curled near the wall, his face soaked in tears, his small shoulders shaking with the kind of fear no child should ever know. I called his name, once, then again, louder, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up, and that's when I saw it, the bruise. Dark and wide, blooming across his back just above his waistline, visible through the opening of his thin white shirt. A punch of color that should never have been there. He didn't speak. He just ran into my arms, sobbing into my chest like he was trying to disappear inside me. I felt my throat tighten, a scream of my own pushing to escape. But I held it down. For him. We didn't speak on the drive home. I watched him through the rearview mirror, saw how he stared out the window, lips trembling. My hands gripped the wheel so tight they went numb. At home, I helped him out of the car, knelt down, and gently touched his back. He flinched. The skin was hot, swollen. I asked softly, "Baby, what happened?" He hesitated. Looked away. "You can tell me," I whispered. His voice was a thread of sound. "Aunt Amanda." Everything inside me went still. "She got mad when I spilled juice," he said. "At Grandma and Grandpa's. She said I was being disrespectful. She yelled. Grabbed me. Hit me. I felt the blood drain from my face. Amanda. My sister-in-law. At my parents' house. During what was supposed to be a normal visit. I wanted to scream, to rage, to tear down every wall that had protected her from the consequences she so clearly deserved. But Noah needed calm. He needed me present. So I nodded, kissed his forehead, and told him he did the right thing by telling me. That night, I watched him sleep. He curled into himself like a frightened animal. I didn't sleep. I sat in the hallway, numb, staring into the dark. My phone buzzed once with a message from Daniel, my husband, asking how Noah was doing. I didn't answer. I didn't know how to explain the chasm that had just opened beneath my feet. In the morning, I took photos of the bruise. Documented every inch. We went to the pediatrician, who confirmed the injury was consistent with blunt force trauma. My hands trembled as I signed the forms, my mind racing. When we got home, I opened the closet, pulled out Noah's school backpack, and removed a small digital recorder. I had placed it there 2 weeks ago, hidden in a side pocket, after he came home one afternoon saying Grandma had called him soft and a boy who needed fixing. I hadn't known what to do then. I'd felt paralyzed by the weight of my own family history. But now? Now there was no hesitation. I plugged the recorder into my laptop and listened. At first, just the rustle of papers, a car ride, distant voices. Then clearer sounds. Familiar ones. My father's gruff tone barking orders. My mother's clipped, dismissive replies. Amanda's voice, sharp, full of judgment. And Noah's, quieter than all the others, trying to explain something I couldn't quite hear. Then came the slap. A wet, vicious sound. Followed by Noah's startled cry. My hand shot to my mouth. I paused the recording. Rewound. Listened again. And again. It was unmistakable. Amanda had hit my son. Not in a moment of panic, not by accident. It was controlled. Cold. Purposeful. The kind of violence that hides behind smiles and family portraits. I closed the laptop. My heart thundered. The silence in the room felt deafening. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed my phone, and stared at the contacts list. Her name glared back at me, Amanda L. I didn't tap it. Not yet. This wasn't something to be handled with a call or a polite conversation. This was bigger than her. Bigger than me. This was a reckoning. And it was only the beginning. Sunday dinners used to be sacred. A routine of roast chicken, overcooked green beans, and conversations that always circled back to the same tired stories. But this Sunday, I walked into my parents' house carrying something no one at that table expected: truth. Amanda greeted me at the door with her usual smirk. She looked me up and down like she was already prepared to win whatever unspoken argument we hadn't yet started. I didn't return the smile. Noah stayed at home with Daniel, safe. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice didn't. "We need to talk," I said as soon as we sat at the table. The clinking of silverware stopped. Amanda cocked her head like a curious bird. My father narrowed his eyes. My mother reached for the wine. "Noah told me what happened," I said. "Last week. You hit him." The silence wasn't dramatic. It was chilling. Like the air had been sucked out of the room. Amanda didn't even blink. He was being disrespectful. He needed correction. I blinked, stunned at her composure. "Correction?" I echoed. "You call hitting a child correction?" She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. It wasn't a slap across the face. It was a warning. A reminder of how to behave. I turned to my parents, expecting outrage. Or at least concern. But my mother just sighed, like I was being dramatic. My father looked away. And then, he spoke. "She did what we used to do with you," he said. "You turned out fine." My breath caught in my throat. My mother nodded in agreement. "Sometimes kids need a firm hand. He's too soft. Always crying, always clinging to you." I looked at them, each of them, like strangers. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. "He had a bruise the size of my fist on his back," I said. A pediatrician confirmed it. "This isn't discipline. This is abuse." Amanda rolled her eyes. "You're just trying to start a fire because you can't control your own kid. He's weak, and you're making him weaker." I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. My hands clenched at my sides. "You don't get to touch my son. You don't get to decide how he should be raised." Then I turned to Daniel. He'd stayed quiet all through dinner, barely touching his food. "Say something," I whispered to him. He looked up, slow and calm, too calm. "I already did," he said. There was something in his voice I didn't recognize. Resolve. And guilt. Later, in the car, he told me. "I hired a lawyer last week," he said, staring out the window. I wanted to be ready. I knew it wasn't just a one-time thing. I saw bruises before. He made excuses. I believed him. I didn't want to believe the truth. I felt the air leave my lungs. "You knew?" He nodded. "Not everything. But enough. I didn't want to break the family. But I won't protect them anymore." I sat in the driver's seat, stunned. The lies weren't just coming from my family. They had been soaking into my own home. My marriage. And suddenly, I realized how deep the roots of silence ran. Amanda didn't act alone. She acted with the permission of everyone at that table. The silence was their weapon. Their way of saying, "We've always done it this way, so it must be right." But it wasn't. And now, they were going to learn what it meant when a mother stops being silent. I sat alone in the living room, the lights dimmed, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen the only sound. The house was quiet, but my thoughts weren't. They raced. They screamed. Everything about that dinner replayed in my mind, the cold words, the blank stares, the terrifying normalcy of what they defended. And then Daniel's voice echoed again, "I saw bruises before." How many times had Noah suffered silently? I opened my laptop, plugged in the recorder again, and hit play. I had only skimmed it before, heard enough to feel the ground shake beneath me. But now I listened with full intention, pen and paper beside me, ready to document every sound, every voice, every horror they never thought would be exposed. Noah's voice came through first, soft and unsure, asking if he could use the bathroom. Then came my father, snapping, "You'll wait until after dinner. You don't get to decide things around here." My mother's voice followed, low and firm, "Sit down and stop fidgeting. Boys don't whine. That's your mother's fault, all that coddling." I pressed pause. My hand shook. Then I hit play again. Amanda entered mid-scene, her voice sharper than the rest. "He spilled juice," she said, as if announcing a crime. "Can't even hold a glass. Pathetic." Noah apologized. His voice trembled. I felt my eyes sting with tears. Then came the worst part. A sudden smack, loud, undeniable. His cry followed instantly. Not the kind of cry that came from surprise. It was fear. Deep, shattering fear. And then, "Amanda again, you think crying's going to fix it? Wipe your face. You're acting like a baby." I stopped the recording, tears now rolling freely. My pen had fallen to the floor. I couldn't write. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't believe how calmly they broke him. But I knew it now, this wasn't just Amanda. It wasn't even just my parents. This was a system, a legacy passed down like a family recipe. A twisted method of control, dressed up as parenting. They called it discipline. I called it damage. Daniel sat down next to me, silent for a while. He didn't try to touch me, didn't offer words. Just waited. Finally, I handed him the headphones. He listened. And when he took them off, I saw it, something had shifted in him. His jaw was set. His eyes were cold. "We take this to the lawyer," I said. He nodded. "Tomorrow." But before I could even shut the laptop, my phone buzzed. A message from my younger sister, Emily. "Can we talk? Alone. Please." We hadn't spoken much in years. She had moved to Raleigh, kept her distance from the family, never really explained why. I always thought she just wanted her own space. But now, my stomach twisted. We met the next day at a small park outside town. She sat down beside me on the bench, her eyes already glossy with unshed tears. "I heard about Noah," she said. "And Amanda. I need you to know. I believe you." It felt like an exhale I didn't know I'd been holding. Then she looked at me, her face crumbling. "They did it to me too. All of them. Dad. Mom. Even Amanda when she got older. They used to call it tough love. Said I was too emotional, that I needed to be trained out of it. I thought I'd imagined it. That maybe I was just sensitive. But hearing what happened to Noah, her voice cracked, it brought everything back. I reached for her hand. She gripped mine like she was drowning. "You're not crazy," I whispered. "You never were." We sat there in silence for a long time. I realized then how deeply the damage went. How many children in our family had grown up thinking pain was love, that silence was strength, that obedience was the price for acceptance. Not anymore. We returned home with a new resolve. Daniel booked an appointment with our attorney. I compiled transcripts from the recordings. Emily wrote a statement. And deep inside, beneath the heartbreak and anger, something started to burn, a small, growing fire. They had trained us to be silent. But now, we had proof. And the silence was about to be shattered. I walked into the law office gripping my laptop like it was a weapon. Daniel was beside me, his hand warm and firm on my back. We didn't speak much on the drive. There was nothing left to say, only action now. Our lawyer, Michael Reyes, was already waiting in his office when we arrived. He was calm, the kind of man who didn't flinch easily. But when I played the audio for him, even he looked shaken. "You understand what this means?" he asked, pausing the recording after Amanda's voice barked its second insult and the crack of the slap echoed through the room. I nodded. It means they can't pretend anymore. It's no longer just my word against theirs. Michael leaned back in his chair. You have enough to begin proceedings. We can request a restraining order against Amanda. We'll also file a formal request to restrict contact between Noah and your parents until further review. But be prepared. This isn't going to be quiet. That was fine. I didn't want quiet anymore. As we finalized the paperwork, I felt the weight of years lifting, only slightly, but enough to breathe. After we left the office, Daniel drove back home to check on Noah while I stopped at a small diner for coffee. I needed a moment. Just a moment. That was when I saw her. Emily. She was seated alone at a corner table, flipping through a journal, chewing on her pen like she always had in high school. I hadn't planned to see her again so soon, but something in her face told me she'd been waiting. I slid into the booth across from her. She didn't look up right away. I've been writing everything down, she said. Memories. Names. Dates. Things I tried to forget. I didn't interrupt. I let her talk. When I was 12, she said slowly, Dad made me kneel on rice for over an hour because I didn't clean my closet the way he wanted. Mom said I was lucky it wasn't worse. Amanda told me it was good for my spine. And I believed them. For years, I believed it was love. My stomach turned. I'd forgotten that memory, or maybe I'd buried it. I remembered her crying in the bathroom afterward, knees bleeding. I had been 14. And I had said nothing. Emily finally looked at me. Her eyes were heavy with something deeper than pain. Recognition. They hurt us. And we grew up thinking that was just how families worked. I nodded, speechless. She reached into her bag and handed me a folder. Inside were printed emails, old letters, photos. Pieces of her childhood she'd kept hidden. Pieces that now looked too much like Noah's. I want to help, she said. Not just with your case, with everything. I've kept this to myself for so long. I don't want another child in our family, or any family, to think being hid is love. We stayed there for hours, drinking cold coffee and sharing fragments of truth. By the time I left, I had more than a folder. I had a witness. A partner in this war. And maybe, for the first time in years, I had my sister back. That night, as I tucked Noah into bed, he asked if he could sleep with the light on. I told him yes. No questions. No pushback. He looked at me and whispered, "You believe me, right?" My heart cracked. "Always," I said. "Always, baby." Then I sat on the couch and emailed Michael everything Emily had given me. The timeline was forming. The case was strengthening. But deeper than that, a story was unfolding. One not just of violence, but of generational wounds. And if we were going to end it, we had to name it. All of it. I didn't sleep that night. I organized files, labeled audio clips, printed timelines. I started drafting a document that would later become something much bigger than evidence. It was a map of silence, of complicity, of survival. The next morning, I received a message. From Amanda. I heard you're playing detective. Just remember, families who air dirty laundry often end up alone. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted the message and blocked her number. Let her try. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I never meant to dig up the past. But the present had forced my hands into the soil. It started with a drawer. I was searching for Noah's birth certificate, something simple, bureaucratic, when I found the old photo album buried beneath a pile of tax folders. The cover was worn leather, cracked at the corners, smelling faintly of mildew and dust. I hadn't opened it in over a decade. Inside were images that once brought comfort. Emily and I in matching dresses on Easter morning. My mother smiling too wide. My father holding a belt in one hand, beer in the other. As a child, I thought he held the belt because he'd just come home from work. Now I saw it differently. Now I remembered the sting. I kept flipping through the pages, heart pounding. And then I saw it. A photo of me at 9 years old, sitting at the edge of the porch, arms wrapped around my knees. My shins were red, bruised. I remembered the story, how I had tripped while playing. But now I recalled the truth. I had answered my father with what he called a tone. He made me stand with my arms outstretched for 30 minutes. When I cried, he brought the switch. And my mother? She had watched from the kitchen window. Pretending to scrub dishes, pretending not to hear. I slammed the album shut. Memories I had once tucked into shadowy corners of my mind came flooding back, forced prayers on bruised knees, being locked outside in winter for talking back, meals skipped as punishment for sassy eyes. I had normalized all of it. Called it culture. Discipline. Tough love. I had defended it when others asked. But now? Now I saw what it really was. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out my notebook, the same one I'd started for Noah's case. But instead of adding new entries, I opened a fresh page. At the top, I wrote what they did to me. The list grew quickly. By the time I stopped, the page was full. I realized then that the bruises I carried weren't just physical. They were stitched into the way I second-guessed myself. Into the silence I'd worn like armor for years. Later that day, Emily came by. I showed her the list without a word. She read it slowly, and when she looked up, there were no questions in her eyes. Only recognition. I remember the porch, she said quietly. You didn't come inside until dinner. I nodded. She reached for the pen and started a list of her own. We spent hours that way, writing, remembering, reclaiming. It felt like excavating a collapsed house, digging out the bones no one wanted to admit were buried there. When Daniel came home, he stood in the doorway, watching us. Are you sure this is healthy? He asked gently. It's necessary, I said. I need to know how far it goes. That night, I had a dream. I was back in my childhood bedroom. The walls were peeling, and someone was calling my name. When I opened the door, the hallway was dark. My father's voice echoed through the silence, "Don't speak unless spoken to." I turned, but no one was there. I woke in a cold sweat, heart racing, the weight of that voice still pressing on my chest. In the morning, Emily and I drove to the courthouse to file supplemental testimony. Michael said it wasn't required, but it would help build a clear picture. A legacy of control, masked as parenting. We submitted our lists, signed affidavits, and returned home in silence. A few days later, Michael called. We'll need to prepare for pushback, he said. They're going to deny everything. I wasn't surprised. But I was ready. What I didn't expect was what came next. A message from one of my cousins, Rachel. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Hey. I heard about the recording. I'm not brave like you, but I believe you. And you're not the only one. I stared at the message, stunned. The cracks were widening. The silence that held our family together was beginning to split. And in those cracks, other voices were emerging. That afternoon, I sat with Noah on the living room floor. He was coloring a spaceship, his brow furrowed in concentration. Do you remember when I told you people hurt others because they were hurt too? I asked. He looked up. Yeah. Well, I said, I think we're stopping it. Bit by bit. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that reminded me why I had started this. Why I couldn't stop. I kissed his head and whispered, "It ends with us." The audio wasn't meant to be shared. Not yet. Michael had stored the original files securely, and only he, Daniel, and I had access. Or so I thought. It happened on a Thursday morning. I was folding laundry when my phone began to buzz, relentless, one notification after another. At first, I thought it was a glitch. But then I saw the name of the group chat, Familia Martins, Carolina. A place where recipes were shared, where birthday messages were sent too late, where silence had always been safer than truth. Someone had leaked the recording. Not a segment. The full audio file. Noah's voice, Amanda's words, the slap, the aftermath, everything. My fingers shook as I opened the thread. There were already dozens of messages. This is edited. That child is too dramatic. Christian is making it worse than it is. Why would anyone record their own child unless they planned this? She's exploiting him. Disgusting. Then came the final punch, from my mother. This is betrayal. You crossed a line. You used your child to wage war. If you continue, you're no longer part of this family. I stared at the screen. Not in anger, not even in pain, but in numb disbelief. This wasn't just denial. It was defense. Defense of the abuser. Defense of silence. Defense of a system they couldn't admit was broken because they had built their lives on top of it. I set the phone down slowly. Walked to the bathroom. Threw up. Daniel found me minutes later, still on the floor. They leaked it, I said. They turned it into a weapon. He crouched beside me. We'll trace it. Michael will know what to do. But that wasn't what broke me. It was the next message. From Amanda. You should be ashamed. You're trying to destroy a family just because you couldn't keep your son under control. I should have hit him harder. I read it 3 times before I could believe it. Then I called Michael. I didn't even greet him. I just said, she sent a message. Threatening. Admitting it. Screenshot it, he said instantly. Forward everything to me. This may be the evidence that makes the judge move faster. We filed for an emergency injunction within the hour. Michael assured us the leak would be addressed legally. But emotionally? There was no undoing it. The calls started coming later that night. First my aunt, whispering about how disappointed she was. Then a cousin, claiming I was tearing the family apart. Finally, my father. He didn't yell. That would have been too human. He just said, this ends now. Or we cut you off completely. And I said, for the first time in my life, then cut me off. The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. When I hung up, I felt something inside me snap, not like a break, but like a cord being cut. A tether to people who had always demanded loyalty, but never once offered safety. I walked into Noah's room. He was sleeping peacefully, one hand resting on a stuffed dinosaur. I sat beside him, brushing the hair from his forehead. I remembered being his age. Afraid of every noise in the night. Wondering if I had disappointed someone again. Wondering what tomorrow's punishment would be. And I realized I had made him a promise I hadn't spoken aloud, he would never know that fear. Not while I still breathed. The next morning, I deactivated the family group chat. Blocked numbers. Cleared space. Emily did the same. She sent me a text that simply said, "We're not orphans. We're free." And yet, it still hurt. The grief was sharp, not for what I lost, but for what I had once believed I had. A family that would protect, defend, and love without conditions. That family never existed. What existed was a performance. A fragile facade that cracked the moment it was tested. We sat with Michael again the following week. He reviewed the newest evidence, the message from Amanda, the reactions from the family. It strengthens your case, he said. But it also means they're desperate. Be ready. I nodded. And in that moment, I wasn't afraid. Because now, they weren't just defending abuse, they were confirming it. It was no longer about proving what happened. That part was over. Now it was about protection. About making sure the damage stopped here, now, and never reached Noah again. The restraining order against Amanda was approved within 72 hours. The judge didn't hesitate. Michael had submitted the recordings, the screenshots, the medical report, and Amanda's own message, her chilling line, "I should have hit him harder." That alone would have been enough. But the judge went further. He extended the restriction to include any in-person, phone, or digital contact with Noah. If Amanda so much as stood on the same sidewalk, it would be a violation. I cried in the courthouse bathroom, not because I was overwhelmed, but because it was the first time I felt like someone outside this tangled family finally saw the truth. We didn't stop there. Daniel and I filed an official request to suspend all visitation rights between Noah and my parents. It wasn't easy. Legally, grandparents still had routes of access. But the evidence we submitted painted a long and detailed portrait of emotional manipulation, consistent verbal aggression, and physical tolerance of abuse within their home. Emily's affidavit was the cornerstone. She described in painful detail the pattern she had endured, how Amanda was empowered by our parents, how their silence wasn't ignorance, it was complicity. The social worker assigned to our case was calm, professional. She visited the house, spoke with Noah privately, and later told me in a soft voice, "He's very aware of what happened." That's not common in children his age. He's also very clear on who made him feel unsafe. I asked her if he was okay. She paused. He will be. But these wounds aren't always visible. And so I began to act beyond the legal walls. I started small, designing flyers and digital posts about emotional abuse within families. I created them late at night after Noah had fallen asleep, researching language that could reach people who didn't even know they were being hurt. The posts didn't use names. They didn't accuse. They described. If you were ever told your tears were weakness, if you were ever shamed for needing affection, if your fear was called obedience, at first, it felt like whispering into a void. But then came the messages. I never realized that was abuse until now. Your words made me look at my childhood differently. I thought I was the only one. It grew. I created a private forum, open channels for anonymous stories. Survivors came quietly, like moths drawn to something fragile but warm. I didn't share my name, but I didn't need to. The story was theirs too. Daniel supported every step. He handled the financial logistics, helped review posts, screened messages. It was his quiet way of saying, "I'm with you," even when the air around us still carried tension. But the pushback hadn't stopped. One afternoon, we received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo of Noah, taken from a distance at the park, his face blurred but unmistakably him. On the back, written in block letters, "You think you can erase blood?" I stared at the paper for a full minute before my knees gave out. Daniel took over from there, contacting police, securing the home with cameras, alerting the school. I hated the way fear re-entered our home, like a shadow crawling back in through the cracks we thought we'd sealed. But I didn't let it paralyze me. Instead, I expanded the campaign. Quietly, methodically. I arranged a meeting with the local church where many of our extended family still attended. I didn't go to start a fight, I went to ask for space for a community event on emotional resilience in parenting. The pastor looked at me carefully, unsure. But he said yes. The day of the event, 37 people showed up. Some I recognized. Some I didn't. But in every face, I saw echoes of the same confusion, the same inner wrestling. What is love when it comes with fear? I spoke, not as a victim, but as a witness. Not to shame, but to illuminate. And for once, no one interrupted me. When I returned home that night, Noah met me at the door, holding his sketchbook. He had drawn our family, me, him, and Daniel, standing under a banner that said safe. That word had never meant so much. The war was still on. But now, we were fighting it with laws, with community, with truth. And most of all, with light. The truth doesn't set you free. Not right away. First, it breaks everything. Then it waits to see if you can still breathe inside the rubble. 2 weeks after the event at the church, Daniel received the call he had been dreading. The partnership offer, an expansion within his company, long promised by his brother-in-law, was withdrawn. Officially, they cited budget realignment. Unofficially, the silence on the other end of the line said everything. Amanda's husband had pulled strings. Daniel hung up, calm on the outside. But I saw the flicker behind his eyes. Disappointment is a quiet predator. It doesn't roar, it seeps. You okay? I asked. He nodded. We'll find another way. That night, I cooked dinner with heavier hands. The kitchen, once a place of recovery, felt too quiet. I watched Daniel set the table in silence, Noah humming softly to himself as he colored spaceships at the counter. Everything looked intact. But I knew what we had lost. Connections. Stability. Illusions. Later that week, the threats escalated. The anonymous notes were no longer vague. They came with specific details. Our address. Noah's school pickup time. One note read, "You've turned him against his own blood. That makes you dangerous." I took it straight to the police. They logged it, added extra patrols. But the officer's eyes told me what he didn't say, unless they act, there's little we can do. Still, we didn't stop. Noah began waking up at night. Sometimes from nightmares, sometimes just afraid to be alone. He asked to sleep with the door open. He began biting his nails again, something he hadn't done in over a year. I held him one night as he whispered, "Are the bad people still mad at me?" My heart cracked. "No, baby," I said. "They're just afraid of the truth. And you were brave enough to tell it." But inside, I couldn't stop shaking. Because I knew that kind of bravery carried a cost. In therapy, his counselor called it anticipatory anxiety, the fear of fear itself. It creeps in quietly, reshaping the world through a lens of caution. Noah had become a mirror of my own childhood, and I hated that I recognized the patterns so easily. Emily stepped up. She drove 2 hours every weekend just to stay with us. She cooked, helped with laundry, played games with Noah. She became the calm between storms. "I can't change what they did to us," she said one night. "But I can help rebuild what they can't touch." Then came the letters. Not handwritten. Typed. Formal. From a distant uncle I hadn't spoken to in years. From a cousin who used to braid my hair. Each one wrapped in polite cruelty, masked in phrases like "family should stick together" and "airing private matters helps no one." One letter accused me of coaching Noah. Another called me a sad woman desperate for attention. I read them all. Then burned them in the fire pit behind the house. Daniel sat beside me as we watched the flames eat the pages. "They think silence was unity," he said. "They don't understand that silence was rot." I didn't speak. I just stared at the ashes, at the words dissolving into smoke, wondering how many others had swallowed that same poison. But amid the wreckage, there were glimpses of hope. A mother approached me after school pickup, one I barely knew. "I saw your campaign," she whispered. "I've been wondering if what happened to me as a child wasn't normal. You helped me name it." An elderly man from church left a note on my porch, "My brother was like your father." I stayed silent for 60 years. Thank you for breaking that cycle. It didn't erase the threats. It didn't bring peace. But it reminded me, this fight wasn't just mine anymore. We were planting something. Something fragile. Something powerful. And fragile things, I'd learned, grow roots in broken places. But we weren't immune to the toll. Daniel and I argued more. The tension of fear, loss, and constant vigilance pulled at us like ropes from opposite directions. But each night, without fail, we returned to each other. We never stopped showing up. One evening, Noah stood in the hallway, holding a crayon drawing. It was a storm cloud, raining over a house. But in the middle was a stick figure holding an umbrella, arms open wide. "That's you," he said. "You're the one with the umbrella." I pulled him close, holding back tears. That night, I taped the drawing to the fridge. Because even if the storm hadn't passed, we had learned how to stand inside it. It was a Tuesday morning when the past knocked on my door, except this time, it came in the form of an email. The subject line was simple: "We need to talk." I was there too. The sender? Gabrielle Chase. An old friend of Amanda's. Someone I barely remembered from childhood birthdays and awkward teen barbecues. She had always been quiet, hovering at the edges of rooms where Amanda played the queen. I hesitated before opening it. But curiosity, or maybe instinct, won. "Christian, I've been following what's happening. I was close with Amanda for years, long before she married your brother-in-law. I saw things. I heard things. I stayed quiet because it wasn't my place. But what you're doing, it made me realize silence is complicity. If you're willing, I'd like to share what I know." I reread the message 3 times. Then I wrote back a single sentence: "Yes. Please." We met at a small cafe near the edge of town, one I hadn't visited in years. Gabrielle was already seated, hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was the only thing anchoring her to the room. She looked older than I remembered, less polished, more haunted. "I didn't know how to say this," she began, "but I've carried it for years. I saw Amanda hit her cousin's daughter. At a family event. In the bathroom. The little girl was maybe 5. I blinked. "You saw it happen?" She nodded. "The girl spilled soda on Amanda's shoes. She didn't scream, just pulled her into the bathroom, shut the door, and when they came out, the child was shaking. Eyes red. No one asked. No one said anything. But I saw Amanda wipe her hands with a napkin and toss it like nothing happened. My stomach turned. She did it again, a year later. Different kid. Same reaction. And when I mentioned it, Amanda told me they were weak and needed firm hands. She said it like it was gospel." I sat back, trying to absorb the weight of what Gabrielle was saying. She didn't stop. There were others. Whispers in her family. Parents who stopped bringing their kids around. One mother told me Amanda once punished her daughter for talking too much by locking her in a closet. I never reported it. I told myself it wasn't my business. Her voice cracked. But I knew. And I stayed silent. I reached for her hand. She flinched at first, then let me hold it. "Thank you," I said. "For coming forward. For not staying silent this time." She left me with a folder of notes, screenshots of old texts between her and Amanda, fragments of confessions buried in sarcasm, in jokes, in casual cruelty. Each piece built the case: Amanda's violence wasn't new. It was a pattern. A legacy. And others had seen it. When I gave the documents to Michael, he exhaled sharply. "This changes everything." He began reaching out to others. People listed in Gabrielle's statements. Some responded. Most didn't. But the ones who did shared stories that echoed my own: bruises called discipline, shame disguised as correction, silence passed down like inheritance. Emily helped me organize the testimonies. She built timelines, compared names, marked locations. It became a map of generational damage, one we couldn't ignore. Then came the hardest part. We learned that one of Amanda's corrective incidents had occurred at a daycare years ago. It had never been formally reported, just handled quietly. The child's parents had been family friends. They'd pulled their daughter out of the facility without explanation. Michael found them. The mother answered the phone after 3 tries. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "I didn't want to believe it," she said. "Amanda was family to us. But my daughter still remembers that day. She calls it the Red Room. She wouldn't tell us what happened for months." They agreed to submit a statement. Anonymous, for now. But it was something. We were no longer chasing a single act. We were exposing a web. One night, I stood in front of a corkboard in our living room, covered in names, threads, arrows, notes. It looked like something out of a crime series. Daniel came in, carrying tea, and stopped behind me. Looks like a war room, he said. It is, I replied. But even in war, you start to feel the toll. Noah's therapist said his anxiety was fluctuating. Some nights were calm. Others, filled with shadows. I did everything I could with stories before bed, calming lights, scheduled routines. But trauma doesn't follow bedtime. It lingers. And yet, Noah never asked to stop. Never said, "Why are you doing this?" I think, deep down, he knew. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every child who had cried behind closed doors and been told they were wrong to feel. The next day, Gabrielle sent one more message: "If you need me to testify, I will. I'm done being quiet." And just like that, another voice joined the chorus. The courthouse smelled of old paper and cold coffee. That's the first thing I noticed. That, and the way people avoided each other's eyes in the hallway outside the courtroom, as if truth were contagious and no one wanted to catch it. I sat on the bench beside Daniel, my hands ice cold despite the summer heat outside. Emily was 2 rows down, clutching her notebook like a shield. Michael paced quietly nearby, rehearsing final arguments under his breath. Noah wasn't with us, of course. He was with his therapist for the day. Safe. Out of reach. Amanda entered the courtroom with her lawyer, an expensive man in an expensive suit, who carried himself like this was just another performance. She wore black, her expression flat, hair pulled back tightly. When her eyes met mine, there was no anger. Only calculation. The judge called the session to order. Proceedings began. First came Michael's opening statement, clear, controlled, and devastating. He laid it out like a tapestry of evidence. The audio recordings. The pediatrician's report. The messages. The restraining order. Then, the supplemental testimonies. Emily's affidavit. Gabrielle's sworn statement. The anonymous parent's written account. Each voice, each memory, adding to the weight of truth now impossible to deny. Amanda's lawyer objected repeatedly. He argued bias. He questioned motive. He tried to paint me as an unstable mother with a vendetta, a woman bitter toward her own family. But the judge listened closely. Impartially. And then he asked to hear the recordings himself. The courtroom fell into silence. Michael played a 5-minute segment, the clearest and most undeniable. The moment Amanda's voice rose. The command. The slap. Noah's cry. The aftermath. The room held its breath. Even Amanda shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening into fists. When it ended, the judge looked up. His face revealed nothing. But I saw it in his posture, something had changed. Next, Emily took the stand. She was calm. Collected. Her voice never wavered, even as she described the Rice punishments, the locked closets, the verbal assaults. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply told the truth. Amanda's lawyer cross-examined, tried to paint Emily as bitter, damaged, overly sensitive. But Emily's calm dismantled him. "I'm not bitter," she said. "I'm healed enough to speak. And that scares people who still hide." Then came Gabrielle. She sat straighter than I'd ever seen her. Her voice was soft, but firm. She detailed what she had seen at the family events, how Amanda had described her punishments. She confessed her own silence. "I didn't speak because I thought it wasn't my place. But silence is how this kind of thing survives. And I won't be part of that anymore." By the time the judge called for recess, the room was different. Amanda's lawyer looked uneasy. Her expression had shifted, less guarded now, as if cracks were forming under the pressure. She glanced toward her husband, seated behind her. He didn't meet her gaze. After the break, Michael requested final testimony, mine. I walked slowly to the stand, trying not to look at anyone. I kept my eyes on the judge, on the microphone, on the paper in my hand. I didn't read from it. I just spoke. My son was crying the day I picked him up from school. Not from a scraped knee or a playground fight, but from fear. He told me who hurt him. And I listened. That's all. I listened. Then I looked for proof. Then I acted. Everything after that came because I refused to let his pain become just another buried family secret. Amanda's lawyer objected. Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation. The judge held up a hand. Let her finish. I continued. I grew up in a house where pain was normal. Where being afraid of your parents meant you were being raised right. I believed it. Until I saw that same fear in my son's eyes. And then I remembered. I remembered everything. The beatings. The words. The silence. I will not let that legacy continue. I stepped down. Amanda was called to the stand. She walked slowly, stiffly. For a moment, she said nothing. Her lawyer prompted her to speak. She recited the usual script. I was disciplining, not abusing. I never meant harm. This has been exaggerated. Then the judge asked, do you dispute the voice in the recording? A long pause. Amanda looked up. Not at the judge. Not at her lawyer. At me. And she said something no one expected. No. That's me. The courtroom shifted. She took a breath. That's me. I did it. I didn't think it was wrong. It's how I was raised. I was only doing what I thought was expected. There it was. A confession, not just of the act, but of the cycle. Her voice cracked. I didn't know another way. The judge leaned forward. This court doesn't exist to punish ignorance. But it does exist to protect those harmed by it. And then he issued the ruling. Amanda would be prohibited from any form of contact with Noah for a minimum of 5 years, subject to review. The restraining order would remain in effect. An official investigation would open into her conduct with minors across multiple cases. Noah was safe. The silence was over. But the story was far from finished. The courtroom emptied slowly. No one spoke right away. Even the sound of shoes on polished floorboards seemed cautious, like everyone was afraid to break the fragile silence Amanda's confession had left behind. I stood still, frozen in place, not from shock, but from something heavier, confirmation. We had all known, in pieces, what she'd admitted. But hearing it aloud, in her voice, without evasion or spin, it broke something open in the room. Amanda sat with her head lowered. Her lawyer whispered to her, but she didn't respond. Behind her, the space where my parents had sat was empty. They had walked out the moment she said the words, "That's me." Not quietly. Not discreetly. They had stood up, faces hard with disbelief, and left through the side exit without a backward glance. I didn't follow. Neither did Emily. We watched them go, knowing something had finally shattered their illusion of control. Outside the courthouse, the air was sharp and still. Reporters had gathered near the front steps, but none dared approach. Not yet. Michael ushered us out a different exit and into his car, keeping conversation brief. In the back seat, Emily stared out the window. "Did you ever think we'd hear her say it?" she asked. "No," I said. And not like that. Because Amanda's words weren't just confession, they were exposure. A light turned onto every hidden act, every normalized cruelty, every generational excuse dressed up as love. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet, Noah asleep, Daniel reading upstairs. I played Amanda's voice back in my mind. I didn't think it was wrong. I was only doing what I thought was expected. Expected by who? By the same people who had raised us all in fear and called it strength. By the ones who measured love in obedience and punishment. By the silence that kept pain neat and hidden. The next day, my parents called. Not me. Daniel. He answered on speakerphone. I stood nearby, arms folded, waiting. My mother spoke first. Her voice was sharp, but tired. What happened in court was a disgrace. Daniel didn't respond. She humiliated herself, my father added. We raised her better than that. She told the truth, I said, stepping forward. A pause. That wasn't truth, my mother snapped. That was weakness. She gave in. And you, both of you, pushed her there. She said it herself, I replied. No one forced her. You've made this family a joke, my father hissed. No one looks at us the same. That was it. Not concern for Noah. Not even denial anymore. Shame. Social consequence. Reputation. We're done, I said. Don't call again. Don't come near us. I hung up. For the first time in years, I felt no guilt. Later, Emily and I sat in the backyard, watching the sky dim into indigo. The garden was quiet. Even the cicadas seemed hesitant. I thought they'd be different after hearing her say it, she said. They can't afford to believe it, I answered. Because if Amanda was telling the truth, then everything they taught us falls apart. Emily nodded slowly. She wasn't the first, she said. She was just the one who finally said it. In the days that followed, ripples began to spread. Gabrielle sent a message, people are reaching out to me. Quietly. They're scared, but they're starting to ask questions. 2 other family members contacted Michael, distant cousins with stories eerily similar to ours. Small children once yelled at for disrespect. Teens punished with silence, locked doors, public humiliation. Their pain had been sitting dormant, waiting for a crack in the dam. Amanda's confession was that crack. The church we'd spoken at months before invited me back, this time not as a guest, but as a speaker in their yearly family conference. I accepted. Quietly. I didn't want to draw attention. Just to keep building, one layer at a time. Noah seemed lighter. Still cautious. Still healing. But lighter. He didn't ask about Amanda. He didn't speak her name. But one night, after a storybook and warm milk, he said, sometimes, when people do something really bad, it's because something bad happened to them first. I froze. He looked up at me, thoughtful. I don't want to be like that. You won't, I said. You already chose differently. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching us. He didn't speak. Just nodded once and walked away. We were learning, all of us, how to live without fear, without pretending, without lies disguised as tradition. Amanda's case moved forward. Investigations began into her past actions. Former acquaintances stepped up. A pattern was confirmed. Her husband filed for legal separation. She left town 2 weeks later. No one knew where she went. But her confession remained. And in its wake, 1,000 other silences began to shake loose. Rebuilding doesn't start with bricks, it starts with breath. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe without fear. I left the old family group chat for good. Deleted old numbers. Blocked the ones that still called to reason with me. Emily did the same. We didn't say it aloud, but we both knew there was no returning to what had been. Not after everything. Not after Amanda's voice echoed across the courtroom and cracked the silence our family had held together for generations. But in the space that silence left behind, something else began to grow. I started drafting the plan for the organization a week after the ruling. It was Emily's idea, really. We were sitting at the kitchen table, both of us tired, our laptops open and filled with scattered notes, court documents, therapy articles, and emotional abuse resources. She looked up from her screen and said, "What if we didn't just survive this?" I didn't answer at first. She continued, "What if we built something out of it? For the people who can't speak yet." That night, we named it The Umbrella Project. Inspired by Noah's drawing, the child standing in the rain, holding an umbrella while the storm poured down. We created the first structure online. A simple website with carefully worded articles about emotional abuse inside families, especially the kind that never leaves visible scars. We published anonymous testimonials, links to support groups, resources for protective parents. Every page opened with one phrase, "You're not imagining it. And you're not alone." The response was immediate. Within a week, we had over 300 emails. Stories. Pleas. Gratitude. Most from women. Some from men. A few from teenagers. All saying the same thing in different ways. I thought I was the only one. Local therapists started reaching out, offering pro bono sessions to those who came through the site. Schools began asking for printed materials for their counselors. A librarian in Raleigh requested permission to display our flyers near the parenting books. We were no longer just fighting the past, we were helping others name their present. Daniel built the digital infrastructure. Emily managed the outreach. I oversaw the stories, read each one, replied to as many as I could, cried often. Some were short. Some were unbearably long. All of them were echoes of what we had lived through. But while we built, some things still crumbled. Daniel's career had shifted permanently. He left his old company and started consulting freelance. It wasn't the same money, not the same stability. But it was honest. It gave him time at home. Time with Noah. Time to heal. Some relatives stopped pretending. A few posted passive-aggressive rants online about children who grow up to betray their elders. One cousin accused us publicly of tearing down a respected woman just to feel important. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The words said more about them than about me. What hurt more were the silences that stayed. The old family friends who vanished. The neighbors who once waved, now looking away. The isolation that followed when truth was too loud for others to bear. One afternoon, while picking up groceries, I ran into an old church acquaintance. She smiled, but her words carried weight. I hope you find peace. But I also hope you learn not everything needs to be exposed. I stared at her for a moment. Then I said, calmly, I'm not looking for peace. I'm building it. Noah, meanwhile, was healing in his own rhythm. Therapy continued. School resumed. He made 2 new friends, boys who liked space and silence and trees, just like him. He no longer flinched at loud voices. But he still slept with the light on. And that was okay. Healing wasn't linear. It was layered. One evening, I found him drawing again. This time, the umbrella was bigger. It covered 3 figures, me, him, and Emily. Above it, he had written, "My safe people." I taped it beside the first one. Emily moved closer to town permanently. She found a small apartment, a quiet job, and a louder purpose. Her nights were filled with calls and Zoom sessions with survivors from all over the country. She didn't speak of our parents much anymore. When she did, it was only in past tense. One day, I asked her, "Do you ever think they'll understand?" She shook her head. They can't. Not unless they lose everything first. We never heard from Amanda again. Her name appeared in one article online, briefly, about a teacher under investigation. But after that, silence. No one knew where she went. No one really wanted to. What mattered was that she couldn't return to where the damage had once been allowed to grow. And we couldn't go back either. Because in the ruins of that old structure, of obedience, shame, and silence, we were building something new. Not perfect. Not painless. But honest. And from that honesty, people began to stand taller, speak louder, and carry umbrellas of their own. The day Noah stood behind a microphone, I forgot how to breathe. He was 15 now. Taller than me by an inch. His hair had grown into soft waves that curled at the ends, and his voice carried a confidence I didn't recognize, but admired. We were at the annual conference of the Umbrella Project, now in its 3rd year. The room was full: survivors, advocates, counselors, teachers, strangers who had once whispered their trauma and now wore it like truth, not shame. Daniel sat beside me, his hand on my knee. Emily was a few rows down, notebook on her lap as always. There were cameras now, banners, printed programs. We had grown. Not into something massive, but into something real. And then, Noah stepped forward. He cleared his throat. The microphone adjusted with a soft whine. He looked out across the room, calm, steady. "I'm here because my mom listened." Those 6 words broke something inside me. He continued, "I don't remember everything from when I was little. But I remember being scared. I remember thinking that something was wrong, but not knowing how to explain it. I thought I had to be tougher. Quieter. Better. Because if I wasn't, the bad things would happen again." The room was still. I told my mom once, just once, what happened. I didn't think it mattered. I thought adults always chose each other. But she didn't. She chose me. And that changed everything. He paused, eyes scanning the front row. When he met mine, he smiled, not nervously, not for reassurance. It was a thank you. I'm not scared anymore. Not of the past. Not of speaking. Because I know what silence does. And I know what truth can do too. Applause came slowly at first. Then all at once. I sat there, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. I didn't wipe them away. After the event, people came to thank him. Grown men. Grandmothers. Young girls with notebooks full of drawings. Some called him brave. Some just hugged him. Noah smiled, shy but grounded. Later that evening, we returned home, the air calm, the streetlights glowing. Daniel ordered pizza. Emily poured tea. We sat around the kitchen table, like any ordinary family on an ordinary night. But nothing about us was ordinary. Not anymore. There were no family photos on the walls of people who had denied us. No holiday cards from parents who chose their image over their grandson. We hadn't seen or heard from them in over 2 years. Their silence, once so powerful, was now irrelevant. From what we heard, they lived quietly. Isolated. Their world had shrunk. Former friends had backed away. Some out of discomfort, others out of quiet solidarity with us. They never apologized. Not once. Not even after Amanda's investigation was concluded and confirmed further misconduct. Not after former students gave anonymous interviews. Not after the school board revoked her license to teach. They faded. And I let them. Because what mattered wasn't their end. It was our beginning. The Umbrella Project now had 2 physical locations, one in our town, one in Raleigh. We offered workshops, free counseling, legal guidance, and something more important than any of that, understanding. People came every week. Some cried. Some just sat quietly. All of them knew they didn't have to explain their fear to be believed. Emily led most of the workshops now. Daniel managed logistics. I oversaw the intake program, trained volunteers. Noah, when he had time, helped with the youth mentoring sessions. He didn't like to be called a survivor. He preferred a witness. Because he had seen what silence did. And now, he stood on the other side of it. One evening, while organizing a donation drive, I found an old box in the attic. Inside were relics of the past, a church bulletin, photos of childhood birthdays, a cracked wooden spoon that once hung above my mother's stove. I stared at it for a long time. Then I walked outside and placed the box in the bin. Closure doesn't come in grand moments. It comes in quiet choices. And ours was this, to never pass down what we had endured. Noah was thriving. Not without struggle, but with strength. He didn't hide his past, but he didn't carry it like a burden. He wore it like armor that had been reshaped into a symbol. A reminder. That it could be survived. that it could be transformed. That evening, he handed me a new drawing. It showed the same umbrella from years before, but this time, dozens of people stood under it. At the top, he had written, "We don't run from the storm anymore. We give others a place to stand." I hugged him, tighter than words could say. We had started this fight thinking we were alone. We ended it surrounded by voices. And the family that tried to silence us? They never saw this ending coming.